What does sustainable fashion look like? Let's discuss. In 2013, a garment factory in Bangladesh known as the Rana Plaza collapsed and killed over 1,000 people while injuring thousands more. At the time, those workers were making around $1.43 per day. The world greed then became furious as connections were made to large Western clothing brands that sourced their fashion products through these exploitative conditions. In 2015, the fashion industry came under fire once again with the release of The True Cost, a documentary that highlighted how the global fashion industry was exploiting workers and polluting environments driven by Western consumption. So where does that leave us now? The global fashion industry hasn't slowed down on its impacts on humans, animals, and the planet, and it's increasing, especially in countries in the global south that are victimized by Western imperialism. From start to finish, it leaves a trail of destruction. In response, large industrial brands market themselves as sustainable or ethical to create a new class of consumers without ever having to address a system built on colonialism. Even though some companies display their ethical supply chains where they pay a livable wage and have safe working conditions, a revolution in the fashion industry requires an answer rooted in environmental justice. Protecting human well-being is one component of decolonizing fashion systems, but creating a just system means looking at our impact on the planet and non-human animals as well. My personal relationship with clothing started when I was young. My parents never had money to buy new clothes, so we were always shopping at thrift stores. There was so much teasing and shame for people buying thrifted clothing in the 90s and early 2000s, and one of the things I noticed is that when I was in college and had my first job, and I was affording fast fashion, I felt like these clothes didn't really last long or they were out of season. This made me question that I was buying, and I divested away from this industry years later. Over 90% of the clothing in my wardrobe today is secondhand, like this. Apps like Poshmark, Etsy, and others apps offer these types of avenues for people to promote these clothing. However, I think that the important thing that we talk about is that do people actually know sometimes the material that is used for their clothing? And I think creating relationships with your clothing, especially if it's secondhand, asking yourself, how can I repair this clothing? How can I sew this? How can I mend it? And a lot of the times we don't really know these things, and I personally don't. I don't often think about this shirt costing $10, but what was the true cost of this own shirt? So, one term I want to introduce you all today is total ethics fashion. Total ethics fashion is meant to encompass all of the above. The term refers to a system that prioritizes life and well-being for all, which includes humans, animals, and the planet. And this term was coined by Emma Hakansson, the founder of Collective Fashion Justice, as a way to address certain gaps in our current language around sustainable and ethical fashion. So, why isn't ethical fashion enough? And this is something that I've been kind of unpacking in my own journey. In response to the climate crisis, fashion systems are prioritizing different sets of values and features, but there is a disconnect between them. For example, vegan fashion may not directly involve animals in its supply chain, but can still be built on an exploitative model causing harms to humans or the environment. Ethical fashion might give reassurance on working conditions or a livable wage for humans, but it doesn't account for waste treatment of animals or the environmental impact of animal products within environmental devastation, harming vulnerable human and non-human communities alike. So, even when brands do their best to reduce their impact on the environment around them, they are not always doing so in a way that values the individuals living on this planet, perhaps by exploiting them or paying them a poverty wage. So, total ethics fashion seeks to raise the bar and focus our attention on a new and more holistic target. Many people think that sustainable fashion is about materials, but the truth is that sustainable fashion is about justice. The use of sustainable and ethically sourced materials is a necessary step in a new direction, but the challenge is at a sheer scale of consumption, which is dependent on the long legacy of colonization and oppression. The explosion of Western consumerism and globalized supply chains fueled a new hunger for profit, and business owners were quick to begin satisfying these desires. Humans, non-human animals, in the environment have been put as secondary or unimportant in the face of profit motives. And one example of this is leather goods. They become a $394 billion industry globally, driven by designer brands, and meeting that demand requires large amounts of leather. Brands create this by offering, promoting a transformation in identity through consuming their products, and in the global south, owners of cattle ranches respond to this demand by deforesting more land, often in indigenous territories. And in 2021, the Amazon rainforest saw its highest rates of deforestation in the last 15 years, despite the increasing impacts of the climate crisis, because the profit motive still rises above calls for climate and social justice. These operations disrupt ecosystems and the biodiversity in its habitat, specifically with indigenous rights being seen as secondary than they should be primary. To satisfy global demand, ducks and geese are also kept in artificial environments, violently handled, and often even forced through tubes, allowing to live for just a fraction of their life. In slaughterhouses of all kinds, many workers suffer emotionally due to the brutality of work and are at risk of injury, while being overworked and exploited. The waste from these artificial environments quickly adds up and compounds into larger environmental issues, which is why it's important to talk about human and animal rights abuse. To sustain our global fashion supply chain, there's a violence against humans, non-human animals, and the environment. So a lot of the questions I usually get is, well, what can I do? And even though we can't buy our way to a perfect system, the bridge to a different future is being built, and there are ways for everyone to become involved. Total ethics fashion is meant to address the intersections of veganism, social justice, and environmental sustainability to create a new system to operate within. Inviting new language into our collective consciousness goes on to help shape our beliefs and provide us a new frame of reference for interpreting the world. And as fashion continues to rapidly evolve and churn out new lines every week, it's easy to lose sight of where we fit in. While we adapt to a changing world, there are some guiding questions for ourselves and for companies that can invite a total ethics mindset, and I really encourage you all to think of the following. When you're buying new clothes, you may want to think, do I need this? Why do I want this? Will I still want it in a year? Could I find this secondhand? Could I borrow something similar from a friend? Are there local artisans that I can support that make this? Or does this clothing use animal products? How was this clothing sourced? How were the makers paid and treated? And what is the environmental impact of this? If I don't know, how can I learn more? Do I trust this company? How do I know I can trust this company? How can living by sustainable values empower me or empower others around me? So, if you're making clothes, you kind of want to consider the following. Does this extract from human, animal, environmental life? What about non-human animals being impacted externally? How are humans involved in my supply chain? How are they being treated? How can I uplift others through this process without being rooted in saviorism? Why do I want to make clothes? Could I be making use of existing garments, giving them new life? How can I reduce the environmental impact through the design or production of this piece? The fashion supply chains that we see today are built on centuries of exploitation and oppression of humans and non-human animals alike. The fashion supply chains, hundreds of years in the future, will not be. So total ethics fashion for me is a movement focusing on intersectionality for fashion justice and are an important step towards the sustainable future. If you'd like to learn more about total ethics fashion and the current issues that are facing non-humans, humans, and the planet, you can find more on the Collective Fashion Justice website below, and you can give them a follow. If you truly love this video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and ask yourself, have you ever asked these types of questions when buying clothes? And what does a total ethics fashion system look like to you? Thank you so much.